Hello, everyone. My name is Yuri, and today's live talk revolves around a question: is toxic masculinity real? I will begin with the article titled The Root of Toxic Masculinity. That article was written by Jennifer Galvan from push.com. She's going to give a pretty decent overview of what this is. By far, the worst thing we do to males by making them feel they have to be hard is that we leave them with very fragile egos. And that's the quote from Shimamandra Ngozi Adichie, award-winning author. So the author of the article starts by saying the origins of toxic masculinity began thousands of years ago when Homo sapiens would use physical strength, dominance, and aggression to fight and hunt. These behaviors continued for centuries and into contemporary times, where these behaviors are no longer necessary, yet the attitude is still promoted. Continuing this type of masculinity becomes toxic since it's outdated and incompatible with current times. Toxic masculinity occurs when cultural pressures condition men to behave in traditional, stereotypical masculine ways. Comforting to this type of behavior entails suppressing their feelings, avoiding distress, being tough, and using violence or aggression to portray their power. Toxic masculinity only allows space for men to behave according to masculine ideals, leaving little to no space for femininity, emotions, or help. Ultimately, the primary focus becomes on gaining power and respect and being strong. Example of this includes saying men up or boys will be boys. These learned beliefs and behaviors not only contribute to disciplinary issues leading to expulsion and other consequences, but also contribute to mental health issues such as depression, excessive aggression, violence, and substance abuse. Toxic masculinity stresses the importance of avoiding feelings and therefore compensatory compensant, compensatory behaviors are used in effort to exhibit further masculinity. So there's a lot to unpack here because she talked about historical imperative that involved in the definition of toxic masculinity. She touched on societal factor that is also in the picture. And then she also touched on some of the outcomes associated with masculinity and unhealthy, quote unquote, toxic masculinity. I have a couple of videos to show you as well regarding this topic that I think will be very interesting. The first video is titled What Toxic Masculinity Really Means. I want to play that for you. Let me turn the volume up.
Toxic masculinity does not mean that masculinity is toxic, and it's actually a pro-male term. Discussions about toxic masculinity are very helpful to men. Now, how does this work? For example, lots of boys are told that they should keep their feelings down. If they have suffered an emotional hurt, they should not be sharing it with anyone, and they certainly shouldn't cry. But why? In ancient Greece, public displays of emotions were considered a manly thing. Shedding tears publicly was considered to be authentic and courageous, or, alpha, to use modern terminology. Teaching young boys to just bottle up their feelings and cut themselves off from any sort of emotional support network is a very harmful practice and an example of toxic masculinity. Another example is the normalization of violence among young boys. Do we remember that Gillette ad? The one that caused a collective mental breakdown among reactionaries a few years ago? In it, there's this very creative visual of a bunch of dads standing with their grills in a row, going, "Boys will be boys," as two kids scuffle with each other in the lawn. This scene is meant to reflect on the fact that we normalize violence among boys. And of course, a friendly scuffle between two kids is not the issue. It's all this additional baggage of, boys and men, sometimes they just need to go at each other, to live out their masculine side, to unleash the beast within.
So, a few things here that's been mentioned. Whoops, I removed myself. Few things that mentioned in this video. First was the fact that Men need to control their emotions, and men not encouraged to showcase their emotions. And that could lead to some problems down the road, because there's only so much emotion that you can bottle up. At some point you have to be able to manage your emotions, and what's the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to be able to release those emotions. Obviously that gets really complex, because it depends on who you talk to about that. Some parents will be completely against from boys portraying their emotion, but it has to come out somehow, right? And the fact that he also mentioned in this video that friendly scuffle between boys, there's a time for play. That when you grow up, you want to be involved, like your body needs movement, right? And there's some natural competition that occurs. It doesn't have to be toxic competition per se. It's just boys, they engage in activities different from girls, right? So if boys going to wrestle or fight, jokingly, not the real fight, but they're going to scuffle with each other like kids do, that actually can help. I would argue that it can help with the boys' development. It the difficult part about this, for this not to become an activity that boy perceives as something that he must do to prove himself. So this is where the parenting will come in, because it's not so much about any one given activity the boy does. It's the overall development of the young child. Let's look at some comments. Let's see who we have in here. We have Becky in the house. Hello. We have Jamie. Hello. We have V in the house. We have Liz in the house. We have Lindsay in the house. Long time no see. How are you? Uh, Thank you all for being here. And we have Latanya in the house. Plane fighting isn't a big deal. I don't think that playing is a big deal at all. In fact, I think it's absolutely necessary for a child's development. We're going to look at next video, the effects of toxic masculinity and male privilege on young men. And this one is by Jordan Peterson with Dr. Warren Farrell. Very interesting segment. There's an entire podcast that you can watch on that. And I will drop the links of all these resources after the talk. But let's take a listen of this particular segment of the talk, because it's relevant.
So many of them are suffering so intensely for lack of a single encouraging word. Yes. And it's so sad that they have to get that from me on YouTube or in a lecture, that they haven't had anyone in their life. And we're in this situation now where, frequently any manifestation of masculine ambition in even in its juvenile forms, so the desire to engage in rambunctious play, let's say, is instantly associated not only with pathology that needs to be medicated, let's say in the case of ADHD, which I do think is a disorder of repressed play, and Jaak Panksepp did a lot of work showing that might be the case, but also that we associate that male ambition with, well, the force that's literally the patriarchal oppressive force that's literally destroying the world. It's like, well, how the hell do you expect young men to react to that? And the answer might be something like, well, there's too bloody many people on the planet anyway, and if we stopped running around doing things, things would be a lot better. It's like, well, that really leaves them nowhere to go, doesn't it? Yeah. So except to some very dark places in some situations.
And by the way, before they continue, I also going to show you a guideline by American Psychological Association here in a little bit, that talks about some of the internal conditions that man will deal with, which Jordan Peterson kind of alluded to. So be sure to stick around, because we have some real data coming up from American Psychological Association.
I was doing somebody was filming me talking about these issues the other day, and we were in the middle of we were in a little island in the middle of a creek, and a young man who looked like he's about 16, 15 was passing by, and I said, and he showed some curiosity about the filming, and I said,
I signaled him over here. I said, could you join us for a moment? I said, in high school, are you in high school? And he says, yes. And he said, I was sophomore. And he said, do you, what do you learn about men and women or boys and girls or sexuality and stuff like that in high school? And he said, oh, I hear, I guess, the word toxic masculinity a lot. Mm-hmm. And he said, I said, anything else? And he said, oh, yeah, the teachers are always talking about we're part of the patriarchy and, men, especially white men, are really the oppressors. And then I said, anything else? And he said, yeah, male privilege is always coming out. If I do well, it's because I have male privilege. If I don't do well, it's because I don't do well. I'm a loser. I said, anything else? And he says, you always hear the future is female. And I said, how does that make you feel about your future? And he laughed, in accordance.
Good, he could laugh.
Yeah, he laughed sadly. So I said then, if you're out on a date, are you going out on dates yet? Yes, I am. And he said, I said, do you talk to your girl, the girl that you're dating about this? And he goes, no way. I'd never bring it up. I said, well, why not? And he said, because I just assumed that we get into an argument and that would be the end of any further romance.
Right.
And I said, well, what about if you really got to know her well, like a year or two, and you were really intimate with her? And then he said, well, I haven't had that long a relationship yet, but I really hope I could. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like this deep sadness. I really hope I could share what was in my heart about that.
For just
So, wow, we have commercials in here, but that's the gist of it, really. That's the main part that I wanted you all to hear. So, what I took away from it when he said that if um it's kind of you can't win either way, right? If you're a young male, because on one hand you're going to be blamed for patriarchy and white privilege, right? Male privilege, and on another hand you're going to be labeled as a loser if you don't accomplish something. This is a very tough place to be if you're a young man. And what's really concerning for me out of this segment is that in schools, that's been taught in schools, a place where you expect to grow, the place of most critical development part, one of them certainly in your lifetime as a person, not just as a male, as a person. And those are the messages that young men hear in schools. This is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And the issue is also is that as a parent you can do all the right thing, but if in school that's those type of messages that being pushed and forced on young men, how much time your kid spends in school. So the social programming that happens outside of home is very concerning, to say the least, because why in the world we as a society be taking this type of approach? How in the world it's good for any human being, in this case young man, to hear the message that you either part of patriarchy and you privileged, or you loser? How is that helping anyone? How is that helping the society at large? What I'm trying to show you here is that we are programming kids from an early age here in the USA in particular to grow up, dysfunctional adults. Maybe that's not the intention, but based on what I'm hearing, that's what's happening. And I'm just super concerned about that. Super concerned about that. Let's look at some comments. Toxic masculinity isn't a thing because genders can be toxic as genders have little sway on behavior. Would I agree that some cultures teach bad behaviors to boy? Maybe. I'm over here trying to balance watching you and making 3 different breakfasts. Good, 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 good. As it relates to unrealistic expectations that society puts on males, toxic masculinity is a real thing. White privilege is also a real thing, and these two issues tied together with intersectional feminism. Schools are bigoted. I am homeschooling my future children. Heteronormativity was a huge issue at my public school. That shouldn't be taught at school. Schools are indoctrinating children with the teacher's thoughts and values, not educating in their subjects. Keep those comments coming. I appreciate your thoughts. So let's look at American Psychological Association. They created a guideline. Um, Hold on, let me pull it up. Yes, so the American Psychological Association created guideline guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men. That's the title of it. Again, I'll drop the link of it in the description of the talk. But one thing that I really wanted to discuss out of this document is the section need for professional practice guidelines for boys and men. So let me go ahead and read it to you, and then we can discuss it. So, boys and men have historically been the focus of psychological research and practice as a normative referent for behavior rather than as gendered human beings. And obviously, this is all scientific at this point. So, like, the references are here. If you want to look at the original study or research, it's referenced right here in the parentheses. In the past 30 years, researchers and theorists have placed greater emphasis on ecological and sociological factors influencing the psychology of boys and men, culminating in what has been termed the new psychology of man. For instance, socialization for conforming to traditional masculinity ideology has been shown to limit males' psychological development, constrain their behavior, result in gender role strain and gender role conflict, and negatively influence mental health and physical health. Indeed, boys and men are overrepresented in a variety of psychological and social problems. For example, boys are disproportionately represented amongst children with learning difficulties, lower standardized test score, for instance, and behavior problems, bullying, school suspensions, aggression. Likewise, men are overrepresented in prison, are more likely than women to commit violent crimes, and are at greater risk of being a victim of violent crime. Homicide, aggravated assault, Federal Bureau of Investigation referenced that. So, right off the top, we seen that there are learning difficulties that boys experiencing and behavioral problems that boys are experiencing. On top of that, men end up being um, overrepresented in prisons, and then men mostly more likely to commit violent crimes. So odds are stacked against you as a man. They really are. And so as parents, I think we need to see and understand that. We need to educate our men on a variety of those things, right? Um, Jordan Peterson, actually, the one who said that you want to be a dangerous man, but you want to have your how did he say? You want to have it under control, right? It makes a lot of sense to me. Dangerous man not to harm others, dangerous man to protect yourself and protect your family and protect your country, perhaps. So there I think a man inherently would, a man who has the potential for violence but has it under his complete control and never chooses to utilize that unless it's absolutely necessary. To me, that's what I don't want to. I guess for me, if I was raising my own child, I would educate my child that you want to be able to be a man who can do these things, but you want to be a man who never reserved to do those things unless absolutely necessary. So we, It's not about raising weak men, it's about raising mentally strong men who can understand and make that distinction. So the article continues on to say, despite these problems, many boys and men do not receive the help they need. Research suggests that socialization practices that teach boys from an early age to be self reliant, strong, and minimize and manage their problems on their own yield adult men who are less willing to seek mental health treatment. Further complicating their ability to receive help, many men report experiencing gender bias in therapy, which may impact diagnosis and treatment. For instance, several studies have identified that men, despite being 4 times more likely than women to die of suicide worldwide, are less likely to be diagnosed with internalizing disorders such as depression, in part, this is super important, in part because internalizing disorders do not conform to traditional gender role stereotypes about men's emotionally. And there was a study that was done in 2008 by Addis, or a paper. So, like, when you think about that, I'll read this to you again. That, to me, that kind of blew my mind. So, several studies have identified that men, despite being 4 times more likely than women to die of suicide worldwide, are less likely to be diagnosed with internalizing disorders such as depression, in part because internalizing disorders do not conform to traditional gender role stereotypes about men's emotionality. That's crazy. That is crazy. Instead, because of socialized tendencies to externalize emotional distress, boys and men may be more likely to be diagnosed with externalizing disorders, such as conduct disorder and substance use disorders. So essentially, what the article is saying is, instead of looking inward and saying, man might actually suffer from depression, society will put external factors on man and say, well, he's just using drugs, or he has a conduct disorder, he just doesn't, he behaves off the mark for one reason or another. Those are external factors. So it's much easier to put a label, external label, on the man and say, this is the reason. This is not, has nothing to do with depression, has nothing to do with the fact that he might internally going through psychological distress and actually need help. No, that's an external thing. That's his choice, the other words, to portray their behavior. It's crazy. It's crazy. So let's see. And then, indeed, therapists' gender role stereotypes about boys externalizing behaviors may explain why boys are disproportionately diagnosed with ADHD compared to girls. And that's something that Jordan Peterson alluded to in the previous video as well. Other investigations have identified systemic gender bias towards adult men in psychotherapy and in other helping services such as domestic abuse shelters. Broader social factors such as the stigma of seeking psychological help also negatively impact men help seeking behaviors and the subsequent delivery of psychological services. So this is a lot, yo. This is a lot. Sorry, I didn't put the article on the screen for the last part, but it's here. And again, I will drop the link in the description. But this is a lot to unpack, because if indeed these things done by design, this is super scary. Obviously, that's the worst case scenario. But even if they done accidentally, men are the ones who end up paying the price, and ultimately the society pays the price, because some of these men are violent, some of them are terrible partners, some of them are bad fathers or non-existent fathers. So we are dealing with a lot of issues. And one thing I have, the conclusion of mine, that why we're dealing with so many different issues when it pertains to man and toxic masculinity, is twofold. Parenthood is one of them, and societal influences is another one. So obviously, in childhood, it's a critical time. It's a critical time to raise your boy in a way that will allow him to express his emotions, he shouldn't be demonized for expressing his emotions, that he should feel supported by his parent. If he wants to express his emotions, he should be able to do that, right? um, so there's a lot of things that's happening in the childhood. There's a lot of messaging that happens when the child is very, very young, that could either make or break his life. And then of course later on we'll look at societal influences that happens in school, um, that happens even in the medical field, how a man are diagnosed, for the external factors versus their internal factors, as this article suggests, how men are demonized if they're not winners, right? So they kind of like, as this other video referenced, the fact that you either part of the privilege or you're a loser because you didn't accomplish it. So these are terrible societal influences to go through as a man. And so on one hand, you can feel, if you raised in a household, in a culture, and by a parent who was pushing the agenda that you should not showcase the emotions, you should always handle your own problems, and then you get into a world where you are demonized for being certain way or not winning, what are you supposed to do? What in the world are you supposed to do? And then he could, some of these men, unfortunately, as statistically was referenced by the article, you end up committing crimes. And then we as society collectively just blame it on toxic masculinity. How comfortable is that? We're not blaming it on parents. We're not blaming it on schools. We're just blaming it on that man. And then we're just going to go ahead and label all the men and say, they're just toxic. These men are just toxic. How about looking at their parents and looking at what society have done to them as well? It's not to say we take away responsibility on their part. No, they did something or didn't do something, but so much of it has been developed, like not developed, so much of these issues I feel like have been pre-made or made possible because of the past influences. Let's look at some comments. Oh my God, as a boy dominated Mexican family, these are very true worries and facts. I think it creates a lot of pressure and unhealthy mindset in males. In some cultures, men need to be tough, and being tough can be interpreted differently. Yes, it can be interpreted differently. The question becomes, what kind of support do you give? How do you raise these men in these cultures? Are they not allowed to communicate, what they're going through? Are they not allowed to showcase their emotions from the early age? And what society does to help them, or to do the opposite? Because many men don't talk about their mindset and feelings. Correct. We talked about this last week, actually. The reason, why men don't share their feelings. If you haven't watched the last live talk, be sure to come back and watch it. We discussed quite a few things pertaining to that specific topic. But yes, there's many cultures that encourage men not to talk about their feelings. And this is a tough one, right? This is a really tough one, because you want to raise strong men, mentally strong men. You want men to be able to deal with their emotions, to be able to contribute to the society and to be self-efficient. And you want them to be competent. You can I think it's hard to gain competence if you always in your feelings. There's going to be times when you're going to feel sad, when you're going to feel emotional as a man. But does it mean that every time you're going to express that, right? There's a time and a place. Helping a man to develop emotional intelligence, so he knows when it's necessary to really reflect really hard or seek for help or express it publicly versus when he can overcome these things. So it's not so much either this or that. Is providing the support as a parent, is providing the support as a society, providing education and encouragement for men to become emotionally intelligent so they can have a great ability to manage their feelings and emotions, and not to be afraid to ask for help if absolutely necessary. My opinion on that is you should get help, but you should get help only if you cannot get through it yourself. Boys are no longer being encouraged to participate in something to focus on, like wood or outdoor shop sports. Boy Scouts were taken over by a feminist agenda, so boys stopped joining. That's concerning too. The opportunities for boys to be in a group and for boys to grow, it needs to be present. In my own family experiences, the men have turned to alcoholism instead of seeking professional help for what they had going on psychologically. And I look back and see that now. Some of you putting like very, thank you for sharing that. Some of you putting very like personal things. I'm sorry to hear it. I know schools push this. That's why the male I raised could be himself at home and find ways to express himself. I told him cultures, subcultures vary depending on where he lives, don't define him. I honestly blame feminism for never ever trying to fix men's rights issue. Today is in the military, but he's also a musician. I think you were answering somebody's question. Feminism pushes for the female to be better than the male counterpart while degrading the man for common behaviors. Latanya with $10 super sticker. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. That means the world to me. Latanya said, "It's said, I raised my sons, unfortunately, in a very violent, male dominant home. Seeing me get beat every day, I was like the lady in the Tu Wong Fu, that movie when Patrick Swayze played a drag queen." I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so sorry to hear that. Norse culture has had a huge uptick in popularity in the last few decades because it allows me to be view emotional while still being powerful. Think Viking warriors or berserks. I want to know direct things we can do to help the men in our lives deal with depression and to help them express themselves in a healthy way. So obviously this, take it with a grain of salt because this is going to be my take on it. This is a super deep issue to unpack. And by the way, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not professional, I'm not trained in those areas. So please take all of this with a grain of salt. These are just my opinions. So this is a disclaimer. But I believe, to your point, Jamie, to help men in our lives to deal with depression is one, I think, education, right? Education doesn't mean a lecture from you. Maybe it's sharing an article, sharing data, empowering them with knowledge. That can only help. If at least if they have the resources in front of them. Maybe you're not going to be able to force them to look at resources, but maybe one day They will look because knowledge is there. We have the data. We have a lot of things today that we haven't had in the past, right? So knowledge is power. And why knowledge is power? Because true knowledge can help us get closer to the truth. And the truth is more important than anything, in my opinion. Is one of the most important things in the world, because we can talk about our preferences, we can talk about our feelings, but we can't deny the truth. So anything that we can do to help them to gain the knowledge in general is helpful. I think the second thing is presence. You might not always understand why they're going through something, but if you present in their life, if you willing to listen to them, if you're willing to emphasize, right? And if like emphasize versus demonize, right? So this is an easy recipe, because it's easy to demonize something that you don't understand. Like, oh, you have an alcohol problem. Well, it's your fault. Like, you brought it on yourself. Like, what's wrong with you? It's really easy to demonize and criticize, but it doesn't really help anyone. Obviously, if person is experiencing depression and he is dealing with drinking alcohol, for instance, to deal as a way to deal with this depression, he's already down. I feel like kicking him when he's down, it's not really like a helpful solution, right? Just think about your own situation. Like, always put yourself in somebody else's shoes. If you're down and somebody's kicking you when you're down, is it helpful to you? I don't think it is. So presence and empathy and support goes a huge way, right? Just like we talked about in the past, just being able to listen to your woman that you're dating, and not necessarily always finding a solution to her problems, but simply listen to what she's going through. you know that would be nice if men would get a same type of approach. It doesn't always have to be criticism. It doesn't always have to be, why did you do that? Well, no, like, what are you going through now? Like, how can I help? Right? How often do we ask that question? How can I help? I'm guilty of it too. I'm not asking that question often enough. So, like, when you have man who is dealing with depression, um, how can I help? And being there, I think, goes a super long way. Encouragement. Those would be the two things I would say: knowledge and presence. I remember seeing people telling boys not to cry, don't wear certain colors, don't play with certain toys because boys aren't supposed to. I always thought, why not? It's not hurting anything. What's up, Daphne? Thank you for being here. Appreciate you. Telling boys that crap sows the seeds of ending up emotionally stunned. Appreciate everyone's comments. Thank you. I appreciate you, Jamie. This was nice. This was not nice, isn't the right word. This was an important conversation to have, important topic to discuss. I think we've viewed some useful and meaningful information. I want to make sure that next live talk is Sunday, September 25th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, USA. The topic that I chose is, what are you not willing to compromise on in a relationship? I know we talked about relationships a lot in the past. We haven't really talked about that angle. What are the things that you are not willing to compromise on? I would like to hear your opinions. And what I would like to do is pose a question to every single one of you. Would you like to be a live guest next week? This is your chance. If you would like to be a live guest and interact with me during the live talk, I would like to have you. I would like to have a conversation with you and get your take on what are these maybe one or two things, few things that you deem absolutely necessary not to compromise on. What is this for you? It's been a while since we've had some people live with me from the community. I know I've had some male guests from my own friends, but would love to reignite the connections within the community itself. And so if you interested, please reach out to me on Instagram at Peace Prototype. Send me a DM and let me know. Will you be a live guest, or would you be interested in being a live guest during the next live talk on September 25th? You can also send your thoughts or your questions ahead of time. And, if it pertains to the topic, I will feature it in the next live talk. Okay. As always, if you watching us live or if you're watching it later, be sure to smash the like button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. Anytime you uh, like the video, it helps with algorithm. It helps YouTube um, to share the video so more people have access to this information. And then, of course, set your notifications to all so you can receive notifications anytime that I post new video or when I'm doing my live talks. Let's look at some comments before we get out of here. Latanya, you're on fire. Thank you so much. Another super sticker, $3 super sticker. And then super chat for $10. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your support. That's very kind of you. Liz said, if I had a son, I would want him to join martial arts and a swimming team at an early age. Funny you should say that, Liz. I actually was on a swimming team. My grandma used to take me to swim lessons when I was younger. I think playing sports really helped to shape me as a person I am today, because you go through a lot. You're working within the team, but you also going through kind of mini failures, and you learn how to deal with these mini failures within the context of that sport. Thank you, everyone who joined me live. A lot of people were here today. Appreciate Latanya being here and all your wonderful support. Thank you so much. That means the world to me. Jamie was here today with us. Thank you for being here. Liz was here. Appreciate you. Nori, appreciate you joining live. Daphne was here. Thank you so much for joining in. Alicia, I think, looks like was here. Thank you. V was here. Appreciate you. Fee or Phi was here earlier. Thank you very much for being live. Lindsay was here as well. Thank you, every single one of you, for joining and sharing your thoughts. One more time, remember that the next live talk is going to take place Sunday, September 25th. If you're interested in being a live guest, please reach out to me. I would love to have a few people on with me live so we can have this discussion in real time. Until that time, my friends. Oh, before I say goodbye, Instagram, DM message, direct message on Instagram if you would like to be a live guest. I would love to see you. I hope you are super well. And with that being said, have a great Sunday, and I hope to see you as a live guest next weekend. Take care.